Hey guys, what's up? Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/eggs show. That's EGGSSHOW. Audible has more than 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or just about any device you can imagine. As Eggs listeners, you can download a free audiobook today by visiting audibletrial.com/eggs show.
Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, 1 star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus that runs at 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. This week we have Nicolle Merrill. Nicolle is the founder of Future Skills, a consulting company that examines emerging forms of expertise, skills, and training for the new world of work. Through years of experience, Nicolle has become an expert in global careers and the future of work. Nicolle is the host of the podcast 50 Conversations, where she interviews 50 career changers on their journey to their new careers. Additionally, her new book, Punched Out in the Face, How to Upskill, Change Careers, and Beat the Robots, discusses the future of work in emerging career paths and upskilling to teach you how to grab a hold of the new world of work and shape it into a career path that works for you. Her book will be available later this year in October, I believe. We'll allow her to confirm. And so without any further ado, Nicolle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah.
Thanks for making the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself, background, where you come from, education, just kind of, we like to start from like high school to current and just kind of go from there. So if you could give us a brief recap, that'd be great.
Yep. And we do know that you have an interesting and zigzagging story, so feel free to go ahead and tell the tale.
And zig and zag. Well, that's great. I appreciate that you know that in advance. So let's see. I currently live in the Pacific Northwest, but I originally was born and raised in Las Vegas. So a bit of a different place down there.
Yeah, kind of a different world.
Different world, yeah, different vibe for sure. And growing up there was kind of like, you know, you're seeing people from all over the world coming in and coming to your city, and you're looking around and going, but why? You know, not really understanding kind of what the draw was, because it's your place. I think everyone growing up someplace kind of, you know, looks around and goes, what's going on here? Why here?
When you live in Vegas versus visiting Vegas, everyone's going for the touristy attractions, and you're just trying to avoid them.
Right. And like when everyone comes to visit, they're like, let's go to the buffet, and you're like, I am so tired of buffets to this day. Like,
well, and back in the day, they used to like comp your buffet and hook you up. Now it costs an arm and a leg. You have to go to Old Town Vegas to get any time. I'm over it.
Yeah, the era of the $4 prime rib is in the past.
I see you've had some experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Buffets. Yeah. So like as a teenager or a kid, you're like, man, I got to get out of here. And I didn't leave immediately. I stayed around after graduation and went to community college. And then finally I was like, I really got to get out of here. And ended up applying to a couple schools on the West Coast and got into University of Oregon. They took me.
Go Ducks.
And I was like, go Ducks, right? And I showed up, never had been visited Oregon before. And I was like, ooh, this is pretty cool. And so I kind of fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. And at the same time, I was relentlessly curious about language and culture. And I was a French major because, you know, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And who knows what you're supposed to do with
How did you land on French, though? That seems like one of those languages that, you know, it's like You could go
So
Spanish. You could go.
Yeah, it was like one of those things. I feel like I was rebelling against Spanish because everybody took Spanish, like just trying to be stubborn. Like, I'm not studying Spanish, which is like so practical, especially down in Vegas. Like, we had coworkers who, were Hispanic. So like it would have made sense, but I was like, no, French. And who knows why,
Yeah,
decisions
I
at
lived
like
in
13 years old and then later.
I lived in the Philippines for a little while, and
Yeah?
I learned a dialect that I'll never use in my life, and it drives me nuts because there's a lot of similar words that are in Spanish, so I can understand a lot of Spanish, but I'll start trying to talk to someone or think that hey, I'll say something cool, and then I revert to this warai dialect that I haven't used in 20 years.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Do you still remember some of the words and
I
stuff?
still dream in it. It's weird.
No way.
Yeah, I haven't I haven't been there in 20 years, but I'll catch myself. I'll wake myself up sometimes, and the last half of the dream was in another language that I haven't used in forever. It's
Yeah,
weird.
that's wild. Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it was like, at the time, it was like, okay, I'll take French. And then it just kind of like opened up like a world of like, oh, look at these other languages. And honestly, in high school, I took French just because I wanted to like speak a secret language that nobody knew. But like, obviously, people
That's
know,
what Pig
like,
Latin's
millions
for.
of people. Yeah.
I'm still proud
Right.
of Pig Latin. Thank you very much.
So that's why I picked it. And I studied languages. I studied abroad in college because it was student loans, so free money. And that was the mindset, right?
Right.
And,
And then the bill
Yeah.
comes.
ouch.
Yeah.
My adult self looks back and is like, ooh, bad decisions. But,
Right.
giving out that free money. So I studied abroad and really kind of opened my eyes. I mean, like, I hadn't traveled at all. I'd never been abroad as a kid or anything like that. And so going to another country and just seeing different people, I was just really curious about different cultures, and not just like outside the US, that move from Vegas to Oregon, like the US is full of subcultures, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
totally
so-
different human beings in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
Definitely, right? Even from Seattle to Portland, they're different human beings. They're close.
Right.
There's like...
Right. Oh, I used to live in Seattle, and that tension between the two cities, like outside of the Pacific Northwest, people are like, y'all are the same. And then when you get out here, and you're like, no, man, we are different people.
They're so different, right?
Yeah.
What part of
So,
Seattle did you live in?
in Fremont.
Fremont,
So-
dude. Okay, so do you know the ballroom in
Oh,
Fremont?
yeah, definitely.
I play there all the time. Every time I'm
did
in
you?
Seattle, that's one of my venues I play at all the time.
Okay. I was addicted to Add-a-Ball. I am a pinball junkie. And that place, like, I could just, like, go on down the hill and just play me some pinball by myself. Like, I'm a
My-
social person.
Shout
But
out to
pinball, I
DJ
go all
Side.
in.
He's the same guy. He's at a
Yeah.
ball, and he'll have his bachelor party there because that's just the type of guy he is.
Tell him to
So-
invite me to his bachelor party. I'll be no problem. I'll just be playing pinball in the corner.
So what was your degree in? Like when you were going to
French.
college, was it
Yeah.
foreign languages?
It was just French literature.
Oh, okay.
So I had studied other languages, like I took Italian and I took Russian. But it was more of like, do I want to spend time getting like triple degree? Like, no, right? So I just studied them and like traveled to those places to kind of, experiment with those. And I graduated just having no clue, like most graduates.
So were you like a
graduate.
foodie? Did that help out at all? Did you get to? I mean, because
No.
that
Like,
part of the
honestly,
world.
before I went abroad, I lived on like Hot Pockets and like, hamburger helper, shame to say, right? Like and ramen, but like, yeah, I came back like, oh, I have an extended palate now. But it wasn't
I got
until
the
like-
shrimp flavored ramen instead of the
Yeah.
chicken.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. I remember coming back and like, I took an Italian cooking class when I studied in Italy, and I was like, I'm gonna make this for my whole family. Like, I'm gonna do like the Italian dinner where it's like hours and hours of just sitting around eating, right? Because that's what they do in Italy, and it's
Yeah.
wonderful. And you drink and you eat and you drink and you eat, and like for hours, like it's amazing. And
Sounds like
Americans, we tend to
Spain.
be really
Yeah.
rushed.
Yeah, no, I spend a lot of time in Spain. We actually have a little office over in Spain, and so we spend a lot of time working back and forth between Spain. So hearing the stories of Italy, it's very similar culture in Spain, and it's my favorite thing. But I kind of like you. I mean, I traveled a little bit when I was a kid, but it was like back and forth between my family's house and my house. Like, I mean, it was like not anywhere really exciting, and
Okay,
so
yeah.
it wasn't until much later. Actually, I didn't get to Spain until I was 34. 35 or 36. And that was sort of, I mean, outside of like Mexico and maybe into Canada, you know, sort of nearby stuff, you know, I had never been to Europe before then. And and for me, same thing. I mean, it was a massive eye opener just in terms of the types of people. It actually changed the way we do business. It changed the value I put on relationships. It changed my whole world. So so I have a real sweet spot for Spain.
Oh, I love those stories too about like what happens after these experiences, right? Like these engaging with people from different cultures and you know, some people, you know, maybe you can't go live abroad or you can't travel, but even just engaging with people from different cultures in your own hometown or at work, you know, and stuff like that, like it can shape your perspective in ways that you had no idea.
It's true.
And I like what you said about relationships too.
Yeah, it's huge. Well, and it's funny because so for like my whole 20s, I spent my whole life trying to develop my little ad agency and build my company up. And so for my whole 20s, I was sitting nose down behind a computer trying to, you know, do as much work as I could do. Like I felt like that's what I needed to do for my family. So in the meantime, I was losing friends and relationships and everybody because everybody was going their separate ways in their 20s. You know, they were going to college or getting married or whatever, and everybody was going their way. And so it wasn't until I got to Spain the first time that I sort of got a handle on how important personal relationships are to that culture. And, you know, I mean, of course, you know, here in the States, there are people who have very close families and things like that. But I had been so far removed from it for so long that when I was exposed to it, and, you know, I mean, I had never met most of these people on my first trip over there. I didn't speak the language, nothing. And I was immediately pulled into family units and social units and all this stuff and like immediately accepted. Like it became apparent like that there's a level up on the way that they treat other people versus the way that, you know, I had experienced. And so for me, it was really impactful. And actually from that moment on, we started saying we were in the relationship business instead of like the advertising or marketing business. And, you know, it took us a few years to figure out what that even meant. But like now it's pretty core to the way that we do business. It's all about developing relationships more than it is about, you know, doing a new banner ad or building a new website. So, so for me, it was hugely impactful. And it's interesting because when I go and tell people about it, you know, most everybody comes home from Spain, you know, appreciating their party culture or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
The topless beaches.
Yeah, you know, but for me, the real impact was this, the relationships bit. And so it's become like, you know, one of my, you know, most favorite places. I try and get over there 3-4 times a year if I can. And it's great. And we still I have 2 boys and both of my boys are in Spanish immersion elementary schools. And so they and we've hosted Spanish interns 4 times now, and so we've got one living with us now actually, and so we've been very involved in Spanish culture as long as our kids have been in school, and actually our first intern is now my partner over there. So.
Wow. What I love about your story is like how you can see how like just those you know initial first experiences have just completely fundamentally shaped your life in these areas.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the only thing I have, my biggest issue with it is the insecurity that I have in that it took me 40 years to figure it out. Like it just feels like such a massive misstep, right? Like if I'd have figured this out in my 20s, you know, then geez, you know, how far would I be? But the one thing I do, and it's just a little bit of like self-care so that I don't just throw myself off a bridge, is I just have to say something to the effect of, you know, it took all the decisions that I've made in my entire life to get to this moment today. So for example, this conversation we're having right now couldn't have happened any other way. There wasn't a straighter line to getting to this point. Like I had to zig and zag and go through these, you know, mountains and valleys to arrive at this conversation. And by doing that, it gives me at least a little solace. So I don't feel like, you know, because some 26-year-olds got it figured out and I didn't, like, I don't feel like a complete failure.
Right. And we don't see what they're missing, right? They may have it figured out in this area, but they may not have it figured out like in a business area, right?
Well, and it's interesting too, you know, with social media and everything, like so many people look like they have all their crap together.
Oh, I do. And if you look at my Instagram feed, I am like king, you know, like I got it figured out. But if you look at my checkbook, it's a whole different story.
I take a moment and pause next to every Bentley I can have my picture taken next to. But I own very few Bentleys. And but it is interesting how the sort of because of social media and everything, our culture has sort of shifted to where it looks like everybody's doing great. So many of us are insecure about what we've accomplished because it seems like nothing compared to what we see all day. So
I mean, that I love that you say that because that's actually one of my driving principles about like like we've co-opted authenticity, but like really when it comes to like, so having been a career coach and listening to people tell their insecurities about careers, like it's wild. Like everybody is struggling with it, right? They may be portraying. I've had global executives tell me, you know, they're afraid of, you know, tweeting right? Just because like someone might say something to them, or they're not sure how to write an email,
or they don't
right?
want
And you're
to
just
hit
like-
send on it because it's out there in the universe, and I might
Yeah.
change my mind later. And it's the same for blog posts. I'm the worst.
Yeah.
I'll start it, get going, and then, by the way, you're amazing at it. I've looked at your site. You do really well with that.
thanks.
So props. But for me, I'll get started, and then I hit send, and then an hour later I delete it because I'm insecure and that guy.
Yeah. And I think, I wish we talked about it more, like people in general. I like that you guys talk about it, because you're right. Like when you look on Insta, like it's just like everybody is just shiny, happy people, and we're all kind of trying to figure it out, right?
Well, for me, it's like on Instagram, I can say picture, word. That's it. 1, 2 words, maybe an emoji or something, but I don't have to like pretend like I'm smart and type out this article. You know what I mean? But
I originally started Twitter just because it's lazy blogging. This is before I ever was blogging. I was like, look, I can look good online and look like I know stuff by just like writing a little like title of the article and sharing an article. And yes, I would read them, but like I got hired off of Twitter once because that was what I was doing. And the
really?
CEO noticed me, a startup CEO. Yeah. So like, I was lazy blogging then.
Okay, so you went to college for
French
and languages.
Degree.
And then how did you get into running your own business? I mean, that doesn't seem like an easy segue to go from.
No, I took a job. I did a lot of temp work. I was an admin assistant for a long time because there just weren't a lot of jobs in Eugene, Oregon. And so I did everything from like doing data entry in a Fortune 500 cubicle, just nameless, soulless place.
Go Gems, by the way. The Eugene Gems.
Yeah.
Been to a couple of ball games up there. My dad owns he actually just sold it, but he owns a big truck stop between Eugene and Albany.
Oh, really?
Just off the side of the road there. It's called the Pioneer Villa.
Oh my gosh, I'm probably
on
gonna
I-5.
buy it.
I'm sure if you've driven that stretch of road,
times.
you've stopped there a time or two. But anyway, so my dad lives right in there.
Oh, yeah, that's a very familiar corridor, that I-5 corridor.
Yeah, no, in fact, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but there used to be a really great record store in Eugene. I think it was like maybe a Rasputin or something. I can't remember, but my mother, stepmom, took me to an awesome record store up there.
Eugene has like a nice vibe.
Yeah, it's
man.
super cool little city.
So the one story I have of Eugene is I looked on Craigslist in Seattle looking for like some lighting, and some dude had a whole storage unit of like they're called track spots, but they were the premier club light back in the 90s. It was like the first scanners. And I see this ad and he's selling them for $15 a piece. And they're dated, but $15 a piece is a heck of a deal. Yeah. So I drove from Seattle overnight. Bought. I hope they're legal because if they were stolen, what it is. But
don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, but I bought he had like 8 of them. He threw in some trussing. He also threw in this big, huge fog machine. I think he bought a storage unit that someone defaulted on, and he didn't know what it was. And so I scored like $1,500 to $2,000 worth of gear for like $150. It was pretty good.
Go Eugene.
So I like Eugene.
There's some gems in Eugene to find.
So doing the temp jobs, how did you go from there to running a business?
There was about, I would say, a 10-year gap between that happened. I ended up taking a lot of my priorities in my 20s were go abroad. Like that's all I wanted. So I ended up, a friend that I'd met traveling came through Eugene, and she's Australian. I was like, what are you doing in Eugene? Like, why Eugene? Because it's not like a stop, And she was working for a company that promoted adventure travel, and she was like, "Look, we're hiring Americans to go to like Australia, New Zealand, and because your accent is good down there." So because they were using her Australian accent in the States to sell Australian trips. So she's like, "So if you can like get up in front of a crowd of like 500 people in an auditorium and sell, pitch, I can get you a job." And I was all, "I can do that." So I took a job doing that for like 5 months and went to Australia, New Zealand, came back broke. And at the time, I had applied to a graduate school abroad because I was bored, and I was like, I learned that you could go to graduate school abroad, and so at the time that I was in New Zealand, I was kind of like, I had applied to the school, and then they got back to me like, I don't know, 6 months later or something. I was like, hey, come to Denmark. And I was
Okay.
like, okay.
I
And
like
they're
wood
like, by the
shoes.
way, we're going to give you a full scholarship and living stipend. And I was all, get out of here. Of course I'll come to Denmark.
Did I mention how much I love Denmark?
Yeah. So right, like this worked out so well. Why couldn't my undergrad be like, come to Oregon?
Right.
So I ended up quitting. I had by that point found a job just doing sales for a culinary school after I came back from New Zealand. And again, there's a theme of just job hopping my way through everything. And went to Denmark, ended up doing a year in Denmark. And then after my first year, they were like, hey, for your second year, you have to go abroad again to do an internship. And I was like, great. And then they're
Twist
like,
my arm.
yeah. So I ended up finding an internship in Thailand, went there, and then I made friends who were like, hey, why don't you come to Berlin in Germany to come write your thesis? And I was like, why don't I? So I went there. And then graduated in the middle of a recession in 2008 and came back broke and lived on my friend's couch.
Excellent.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. I feel like we all kind of have that story around the 2008 years. That were raw.
Yeah.
Well, so you collected all this, life experience. At what point did you transition that into something where you felt like, you were either prepared to coach or, what did the business evolution look like?
So fast forward several years of just still kind of figuring it out. I landed a job at a university in Seattle, so in Foster School of Business.
Okay.
I'd always wanted to work and study abroad, and I was like, yes, study abroad. This is my dream job. And I got there and I did it. And after about a year, I was like, this is no longer my dream job. Turns out I don't want to email and sit in meetings all day. Study abroad advisors you think are like flying all over the world.
Yeah, you got to go check stuff out, right?
Right. No, not at all. No, not especially when you work for a state school who was on budget constraints at the time.
Right.
So, because this was still around 2012. And so I left that and changed again and became a travel writer for a private jet travel company. Essentially hustled my way in. Then I had to move to Connecticut because my partner got into school. And so I ended up at Yale School of Management being a career coach there because I had a background in global. So it was a global career coach. And I was like, I didn't know if I could do the job, but my mom was like, look, like you should just try. I mean, and my ego, honestly, I was like, well, can I get into Yale? Like, I didn't know. I went to a no-name school in Denmark, like Northern Denmark. Like, no, but like, come on.
Yeah.
Went to community college. And I got the job at Yale. So that was like a whole new world. And it is an intense environment. It's an MBA school. It was MBA Career Services. And the way it operates is MBA programs are really driven by rankings. And so Career Services is really responsible for getting students jobs. I mean, they don't say it like that, but really.
Yeah, that's the gig. Though.
That's the gig. And your job outcomes influence rankings at the MBA level. International rankings. And so it's a tinderbox. It is a high pressure environment. And I'm a liberal arts grad, right? Like I like language. So it was a very, 2 years felt like 4 years. And that's how I learned to coach. And I remember on my first week, them being like, okay, so one of the main skills you need to use is active listening. And I was like, what? What do you mean?
What? I didn't even hear you say that. What are you talking about?
Like I can give advice. Like, yes, aren't I an advisor? They're like, you're a coach. There's a difference. And honestly, it was really eye-opening to really learn that skill of, sitting in front of somebody, taking in what they're saying, and then giving it back to them in a way that's useful and being present and engaging in the moment. And so that's how I learned to coach.
That's pretty cool.
And yeah.
Why did you call it future skills? And I mean, like from what I've read, you're kind of focused on AI.
Yeah. So I was at Yale for 2 years. I left because I saw that the career advice that we were getting people is still rooted in that old school career advice of where, you graduate and you get that job and boom, you're set for life.
20 years and you got retirement, pension, and benefits.
You got retirement party. You get a parking spot and a plaque and you're sailing.
All I want's to watch. That's all.
So I was like, no, this is crazy. And I was talking to employers that were asking for skill sets that like even the elite MBAs didn't always have. And I was like, well, if they don't have it, then what am I doing? And that really changed everything, honestly. Like that kind of, you have a lot of access when you work at a place like that. And I started at the same time reading a lot of the reports that were coming out in 2016 about, the future of work. The World Economic Forum was like, robots are coming. And all the headlines were like, robots are going to take your jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I started looking beyond that. And what they were saying was like, look, this idea of the lifelong career is dead, right? The career ladder is dead. we need skills. We need a fundamental skills shift, and we need to be looking at skills rather than, job titles and paths. And so that's where Future Skills came out for the name of the company. I was like, look, we're not taught to look ahead, right? We were taught to get our college degree and kind of
and fit into some mold that already existed, a workflow or a chain or something that we need to just jump into.
Exactly. And so it's like we all need to be thinking like mini futurists, and nobody really teaches you how to do that. Just like no one teaches you how to make career changes, because we're still working under the idea we're going to be at one employer forever. We all know that's not true.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, it's interesting, like in the ad business, for example, I mean, so many people jump jobs all the time. Like it's become really commonplace. And I worked in the last agency I worked at had a workforce that was, I don't know, a little more aged than some other workforces in most kind of high-paced agencies. But their clients were, health insurers and things like that were still maybe 10 or 15 years behind the curve in terms of what these cutting-edge companies are doing for marketing and things. So they could use older guys. And so these guys were from that sort of older school where they would stay there forever. So they had a big, big group of employees that worked at this agency that were all, 15, 20 year plus guys. And then all of a sudden they start bringing in on the, the new grads and stuff. You get all the new people, and they're trying to woo people in, because now we're competing on so many different areas for the best talent. Now you're competing on the quality of the snacks and the amount of time off you can take and all those things. So you're trying to win in a totally different way now. And then they bend over backwards to suit these, young kids that are coming in. And then every 18 months, they're out of there. They're just on to the next thing, So it's such an interesting thing.
In the tech world, it's almost like a game plan. Like they'll go and they'll work as a coder, developer, whatever, for a year and a half just to get that year, of work history under their belt. Then they quit, move to another company, and get a 30% pay raise because they have that year mark now, because going in as a new hire, they're not at that level, but they've got the work history of a year. They quit and join with another company, get an instant pay raise, and it's almost like a business plan or a business model for them of sorts.
I argue in favor of it, honestly, in a lot of cases, because what we see is, stagnant wages. We don't see raises, and we see a lot of employers that just don't treat their employees well.
Sure.
And we also see, and I'm, a product of the recession that happened in 2008, like the mass layoffs, right? The hard work and the loyalty didn't matter then. We still see mass layoffs happening, and hard work and loyalty doesn't matter then. And so it's like, how do we reframe this in a way that actually benefits the workers, right? I'm of the opinion, like, you don't have to job hop, but you should be reflecting every 2 years and saying, does this job meet my needs? Am I being valued? Am I being offered to taking advantage of opportunities to learn? And do I work for someone, whether it's a manager or an organization, that actually encourages me to develop? Maybe not necessarily move to the next level, promotions, because there's not always that opportunity, but really take stock instead of getting 6 years into a job and going, maybe I should do something, right? Like, we have to, so I, on the one hand, will advocate for job hopping, but much more strategic job hopping, right?
Yeah.
Don't leave something good in a relationship that works really well, right? If this is a relationship that works really well for you in your place of work, use that, develop that. But if you don't have that, I think employers have a responsibility. Much like you had said, like you're trying to woo talent and stuff like that. They have a responsibility to take care of people. And I think people are starting to wake up and say, hey, look, this doesn't
and it's
work
so
for
interesting
me.
too, as I talk to these different agency owners and people like that who are working on, well, what do we do? How do we become attractive to these new people? So much of it is kind of like lipstick on a pig, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, totally,
It's like, oh, hey, we got snack delivery, food truck Wednesdays, all this kind of stuff. But like at their core, they haven't changed their management style. They're not treating people any differently. They're just kind of putting these, this window hanging around that makes it look like they're just the coolest place, or they've invested a bunch in, renovations or whatever, so they look cutting edge or whatever. And you get there and it's still just the same old thing. It's the same job that it ever was. It's just now in a shinier new building, or it's got, some food truck parked out front.
Yeah.
And so
it's
interesting.
6 months of that job. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm just trying to make the point that we all, I think, start to recognize this, that it is important that we treat our people well and everything. But I'm seeing a very clear line where there is a break between maybe it's a level of understanding, or maybe it's a lack of empathy, or what it is, but there's some division between the people acting like it and the people doing it. Like there's some sort of thing there where people just are having a hard time turning that corner.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you have any advice for companies like that? Like, I mean, managers who've been doing things business as usual, but you're trying to adapt to a new world?
Yeah, I mean, for the managers, I mean, I tend to be on the side of the workers and give it advice to workers. But for the managers, I mean, I think we've all worked for those type of organizations where they say this thing, well, we've always done things this way. I mean, this is such a limiting way of looking at the workplace. And I've encountered it numerous times in jobs. And, you know, I'd look around at the culture and say, okay, what does leadership think? Right? What messages are you giving out, and are you matching the actions, right? I think learning is an excellent example. A lot of what I talk about in the book, I talk about the future of work, but then I lay out exactly like, what are your learning paths? What are the options that you can take to learn new skills? Because this is fundamentally what it's about as we go through this transition, upgrading our skills and making sure we have the right skills and that we're agile. And when I look at certain organizations and like even in my history, the attitude towards learning or trying something new, I can think of the ones that embrace that and the managers who embrace that and the ones that didn't. And as workers start to look at their future and look at, what are my options here? Because I know there are a lot of people, I'm 40, so I know there are a lot of people in my generation around, who have graduated college and gone, gosh, things have changed. Maybe I need to do I need to go back to school? Should I take a boot camp or anything like that? They're looking for those options. And it's not an individual act. Learning new skills, going through these programs, investigating the options at work, you've got to do it in the context of your employer, right? I mean, you don't have to, but, having an employer who supports that and a manager or someone in your workspace that you can trust to teach you new things is incredibly valuable. And I'd say to any of the managers or leadership, think about how you support people on your team learning new skills. Are you letting people work on interdisciplinary projects? Do you have people on your team that can teach new skills? Even the idea of creating an environment where every week you have someone on your team teach something. That's a powerful piece of your culture. And it shows that you're invested in learning. A lot of times they'll call them lunch and learn. Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. It shows that you are creating a culture of learning. I'll tell you, I work part-time for an AI startup right now, and I'm upgrading my skills. I'm learning data analytics. And I had a 25-year-old data engineer give me an overview of all the data engineering and data science projects happening in the organization. We tend to think of mentorship as find someone older who can show you the way. I had someone younger, right? It doesn't matter the age right now. It's about, can you teach? Can you share
Do you
something?
have the knowledge? Do you have the ability
to
get that across?
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't read your book yet. I apologize. I don't
it's
even
not
know
out
if it's not available yet.
It's not out. It's okay.
The only thing I can relate to in the book that I've read is a book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Have you read that one?
No, tell me about it.
It's by some Yuval Noah Harari. Okay. I listened to it on Audible, but it really goes into depth of what the future of AI has coming for us, what you can do to kind of, jumpstart and get ahead of the curve, for example. It breaks down, universal basic income and how that might have to be a thing in the future just because of what AI is doing. Another podcast I listened to is Jordan Harbinger. A few weeks ago, he had a guy on that was talking about how the revolution of 5G is changing AI and how it can make a huge difference on languages, even. By having 5G accessibility with your phone, you can actually have live real-time translation available. So if you have 5G and your AI, you can literally hold your phone up; it'll translate for you. And so that kind of technology and the ability that's coming is kind of scary but cool at the same time. And it'll be interesting to see how things will change and how we will adapt to overcome the problems that AI can actually bring up in the future. Do you have any insight on that and what your take is on, maybe you've covered something similar in your book. Can you extrapolate a little bit?
Oh man, what I love about this conversation and the way you approach it too is this is all rooted in curiosity.
Yeah.
AI, like most of us think about, I talk about in my book about how, this isn't about robots taking your job, right? Because it's an unhelpful question. Like, we don't know, are the robots going to take all of our jobs? When is that going to happen? Like, that's unhelpful. So it's breaking that down and really looking at, okay, what are we talking about when we talk about robots? Like, if you work in, say, the warehouse or retail, we're going to actually see some robots, right? Yeah. But for the most of us, like when working in different jobs, it's more about software, right? Especially like automation software. That is, software that's been designed to do a specific task that humans normally do.
Yeah.
Really good example of this, there's scheduling bots right now where you can just, send an email to a bot and they will schedule something for you, which honestly is a dream for me. I should pay for that service. I hate scheduling. But I also used to be an admin assistant who spent hours trying to navigate people's schedules on a daily basis for executives. So for me, when I think about AI, one of the things, and actually that got me on this path, because I was not this obsessed, right? I actually read an article from, Wait But Why, I think that's the website, that was all about AI. He does incredible graphics and just is really funny and takes really complex topics and distills them down into really interesting stories. And so that's what got me on this path. And I just embraced my curiosity. Like I've got a lot of like skepticism with AI products, right? Like how well they work, what the impact is, where the bias is coming from, but I'm still curious and I want to know. And you don't have to be an AI engineer or a data scientist or anything to be curious about these products. And that's where I think we start from. So when we think about like, how is AI going to shape work and, our society, start paying attention to these products, right? You can read about them. If you come across a product, in an article, look it up, learn what it does. That's how I ended up working for an AI startup right now. Like I run my business, but I also contract for a startup because I was relentlessly curious about AI in the workplace. I want to know, how it shapes our everyday lives.
If you look back to like the early 90s and, Microsoft is coming out, Apple computers is coming out, all those things, if you could take it and have the same curiosity and have been around back then to be able to invest and be a part of something like that, AI is the future. It's going to be around whether you like it or not.
Yes,
it's going to be there, and if you don't adapt and overcome, you're going to be left behind. So whether it's investment, whether it's, anything that the future is going to be built around AI and advanced learning. And if you're not interested in it, you should be, because it's going to be, the landscape is changing. And if you're on the forefront, you can set yourself apart.
Yeah.
So,
and even like I can build on that and just say, like, in the workplace, like there's probably some automated system being used in your workplace. Yeah. Right? Like ask around, go to your IT. I mean, it's no longer limited to IT, by the way, right? It's in sales, it's in, marketing automation is a huge, right? I know it's happening in the ad space. Like you can just start getting curious about it. And almost every industry newsletter now has something about AI. Really good example. It used to be in international education, which is like a niche industry, right? And I just saw that they're coming out with some articles about AI in international education. I was like, whoo, worlds collide. Right?
There you go.
And they're like, they're very traditional industry. There's not a lot of innovation and change in that industry. And so it's interesting. Not only should we, being curious, we have to, because we all have to shape it. Like all of us, we come from different backgrounds, and AI is not solely a tech problem, right? It has impact on society. It's shifting our culture. It changes our behaviors, and it's being deployed in some ways that really are kind of terrifying.
Yeah, actually.
Think about facial recognition and stuff like that.
Yeah, facial recognition is kind of terrifying. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But even like you have a article on your website for hiring algorithms.
Yeah.
Like that right there, there's a lot of bias that can come into play with a computer just looking at criteria and, declined, right, because you don't match all the material. But if you actually got in front of a hiring manager, the interview could go differently. So there's a lot of kind of weirdness that can come into play just by, now you have to submit your resume via this AI, and it's going to filter it for you. And whether you get the interview or not, you might be perfectly qualified for that job, but you don't get it because it filtered you out. I didn't read your whole article, but that's a point someone else had taken in a thing that I'd listened to. But what do you like for hiring algorithms? How does that work? I haven't done the research.
So some of them, so what's happening right now is there are a lot of experiments, right? Like there are a lot of technology on the market with the hiring space. So you'll have as a platform called Intello, and so what they'll do is they'll take data from that they find different sources online about you and put it into a matrix and score you based on that data plus your resume.
So they're going to find my old MySpace profile and take.
Yeah, they don't say MySpace.
already know.
That was actually what I thought. I was like, I don't remember what I did with that, right? Like, and that's the key. That's the key right there. Most of us have spent the last 10 years-ish, maybe more, probably more, living a lot online. Like, do you remember what you posted 5 years ago?
Well, so here's the deal, right? About 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to get off Facebook altogether. I was like, I'd delete my account. I waited the 30 days, everything was gone. And then I realized I needed a Facebook page for work. So I went back to this old Facebook page that I had set up in 2008. I haven't logged in for years. And I literally, I created a whole nother Facebook account to kind of get rid of some people that I didn't want to be associated with. And I left that old account there inactive, hadn't used it. So I logged in to be able to do a live stream for a client. And then I went and looked at my profile, my spelling, grammatical errors, I went from a uneducated idiot to all the way through college, have a degree, and I focus on professionalism now and quality, and none of that applied back then when I created that profile. And it was, I spent 3 hours going through and deleting old posts just so I wouldn't look like an imbecile. So,
And I think that goes back to the point, right? Like, so there's two parts to this. There's your part where it's like, man, who am I from 10 years ago, even 5 years ago? Like, I have different interests. So we don't know what they're taking, the algorithms. What are your criteria? Is it going to be Facebook? I mean, is it going to be, I know some of them use GitHub and LinkedIn, and those tend to be more professional, but I don't know for a fact what they're looking at. And then you also have the fact that some platforms go out and search for data that they don't tell you about, and then they score you, and you don't know how you're being scored. And then other algorithms take in the backgrounds of people that are being successful in the current organization and add those to the mix to predict your hiring, likelihood of being hired and succeeding in the job.
Well, there's a commercial on TV right now. It's something for like State Farm, and it's like, you're not going to affect my score, my ratings, and it's like this pregnant lady who's refusing to let her husband speed to get to the hospital because she's afraid of having her rates go up.
Man.
But I mean, that's seriously something that could be installed in an automobile, and they're tracking your every move and your speed and this, and it's all powered by AI. All of a sudden your rates go up because you sped 5 miles over the speed limit and you didn't realize it. And that to me is intrusive and annoying and scary, and kind of like the facial recognition system. But it's inevitable. It's coming.
So when I think about inevitability, I think about it this way. I've accepted that it's coming, right? Predictive analytics, which is what we're talking about here, and is part of AI, and businesses love them, right? And that's why it's so important that like these businesses are collecting as much data as possible to make these insights. The problem is that, one, we don't have transparency. We don't know what decisions are being made about us and why and what data. And two, it could have very real outcomes, right, on our lives. Like, in fact, our rates go up or we don't get a job. And so I'm accepting that that's already here, right? It's happening. But I don't accept that it has to be that way. And that's where I think people being able to ask the right questions and get involved, learn more about these products. I talk about in the context of HR, right, or hiring and stuff like that, what would happen if we start asked questions, and said, are you using automated systems to evaluate me, or is a human looking at my resume, right? There's other questions like, in the workplace, for example, we're seeing kind of a trend, it's an early trend of automated systems managing people, right? So Uber drivers, Lyft peoples, all the on-demand are mostly managed by algorithms. True. And what happens in those spaces start to move into, more middle tier jobs, right? And so you're going to see automated platforms coming in for management. And that raises huge questions. And so being able to ask questions that are thoughtful and well-researched on these topics are part of the process, and everybody can do that.
So, like, one of the examples in that book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, was like, automated cars. Just the algorithm that you have to write for, okay, potential hazard up front. Do I slam on the brakes and stop and cause an accident behind me? Do I swerve off to the right and, kill the driver?
Right.
That's an actual, whose life do you take? Part of the equation that you have to take, and I don't know that I want a machine making that decision for me. Because the machine will kill you without a second of hesitation, because that's what it's programmed to do.
Yeah.
So, like, if it's programmed to the driver is going to die in the accident, or the passenger, the next car over, it has to literally make life and death choices. And how do you program that?
Well, and that's the question: who gets to decide that as the programmer?
Yeah.
Right? Is it a team? Is it a manager? Who's deciding that? I'm super curious about that. There was so that one's obviously a very good example. There was a really interesting one someone pointed out recently that was with self-driving cars. Should you be able to speed? And if you get a ticket, who's responsible? Is it the AI?
It will always be Siri.
Yeah, blame it on Siri.
You show the officer your phone.
Yeah, sorry, that was Siri.
Yeah, but I mean, like the whole automated car thing too. I mean, if everyone was in an automated, self-driving car, technically you wouldn't have that problem. But now you have a mix of
but
human,
you'll have a mix for a while.
Yeah, and you're going to have the mix for a while. And that's actually another huge thing about 5G coming around, is the ability for the automated cars to have the computer and the bandwidth to be able to get the information back and forth quick enough. So that is actually a huge thing that will advance automated cars, is 5G. But I mean, just the whole traffic. If everyone was on automated cars, you can merge. You would have zero traffic problems. It essentially could take care of a lot of problems. But you got to figure
it. It's interesting too. So we were talking about Vegas earlier. So I recently in Vegas had the opportunity to ride. We had just hailed a lift, but it was one of these automated lifts, like it was a self-driving lift. And self-driving, it still has two guys up front, and one sits there with his hands just around the steering wheel, but not touching it. So it's really kind of a bizarre scenario, because you've been picked up and you've got two weirdos sitting in the front seat.
Yeah, but it's still the early stages.
It's really early in this. Yeah. But so sort of to your point, I mean, it has this technology on board. Basically they spend the whole time you're in the car teaching you about the technology and how it's working and all that stuff. And they've got these displays in there all rigged up so you can see the data that the computer is, crunching and all this stuff. And it's got like LiDAR on it. So from the strip, you could see I-15 traffic. Like, I mean, it had that much, bandwidth that it was covering. Every human, everything is being accounted for. They've got systems and all the street lights that, all this stuff. And I mean, it's just incredible. And so to your point, Mike, I mean, this idea of where technology is going, and as technology advances, this will become infinitely more doable. But it's just incredible, the amount of, also to your point, the number of decisions being made at any given moment. I mean, for one example, and for better or for worse, so me, my niece, and me and two of my nieces took the automated car, and mom and dad and everybody else just got in a standard Vegas-style taxi. And so we were going from the Stratosphere back down to the New York. So for anybody who's been down there, it's, more or less from one end of the strip to the other. And, it took us on the strip in this automated car about 35 minutes to make that drive. Our rest of our family made it in 12 minutes because the taxi driver had the wherewithal to get off the strip, and the ability, but, was able to get off the strip and was able to dodge traffic and get around things and whatever. It was infinitely more, doable, like so much more practical at this time. So it's, I'm not ready to rule out humans just yet.
Well, and me neither. And I think, so what I love about this conversation that we've just had here is this is the kind of conversations that should be happening around all kinds of different products. Like we can talk about self-driving cars because a lot of us we're familiar with that. Like it's been in the news, we drive, so we know what that's about, right? But I want to see that happening way more with different AI products, right? Like the decisions that are being made, how we're using them. Really good example, like Amazon Ring, right? That's that's actually not necessarily an AI product right now, but it has the potential to become one because it's Amazon. But it's the camera that people use for security in their houses. And they're, Amazon had partnered with local police departments to promote that. Police have access to those feeds. There's a lot of debate around that. And I want to see more conversations around these types of products and like, what does that mean for us as a culture, as a society? Who does it benefit? Who does it harm? And it's the same thing in my space with AI and hiring. What are the products? How are they being used? Who makes those decisions? And so on. And it starts with being able to be curious about them, right? It starts with like learning about them and because a lot of them operate behind the scenes. You're not necessarily, you can see a car driving and you can see the shiny robots in Amazon warehouses.
Well, it's like the iPhone example, everyone has an iPhone and knows how to use it, but no one knows how to write the software to make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the same kind of thing. You can use it and it operates. It does what you need it to, but you don't know the internal workings. You don't know what
And
makes
most people
it do.
don't care.
Yeah.
But I think we need to start.
Yeah.
I know we need to start.
I agree.
And
Well,
especially
I mean, it's
back to the workplace. Like you can't hide your head in the sand. And I think there's a lot of people who are like, they do the technology. Am I right? And you're like, no, like you've got to pay attention. You don't have to become a machine learning engineer. You don't even have to become like a software, a programmer. But you do have to understand the tools and understand the basics so that way you're not left behind in the next 5 years.
Well, so one thing I wanted to try and get into, and it's a little bit of a gear shift, but we got a late start on the show, and I don't want to keep you too long because we've only got about 15 minutes left for the hour. So I wanted to maybe shift gears a little bit and maybe get back into your career coaching a little bit and just talk about people that are sort of in our age group. So I'm 39, you're 40, you mentioned, and so and Mike, he's the young kid around here, but he's getting up there with us too.
I'm only 43, right?
No. And so, but so my question is sort of around this idea. So I know for a lot of people, especially folks trying to find their own way or start getting into, how do I keep up with the younger generations, things like that, and I guess we're kind of a unique generation because we grew up with the technology. So many of us have more fundamental knowledge than maybe a previous generation.
Right.
But I know that there's still a lot of people who feel this pressure, like they're falling behind or they're unable to keep up. And how do I stay competitive in this market and that kind of thing? And, where do you start learning and what do you learn and how much learning should you do and how much is a waste of time? And, there's a lot of these questions that are really tough. And one of the things that I come across all the time or that ends up coming up in conversation inevitably is, people get online, they listen to the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world and the Tony Robbins and all these guys about what they should do in business or in life. And it's I think sometimes can be, even though sometimes they're giving you a message that seems sort of uplifting, like, look, it's so doable, any of us can do it. There's some sort of invisible wall there or invisible thing that sort of keeps us from being able to really jump into something and embrace it, learn it, apply it, put it into our own lives. Yeah. And I wonder if you have any advice for, people maybe sort of our age group, maybe let's say maybe even a little younger, like 30 to 50, who are working in sort of, they've been at their job for a little bit. We're moving to this new era where we're jumping around a little more often and maybe we're ready to make a pivot or we're ready to move into the next phase of our life. Where, how do we get started? Like what kinds of information should we be learning? I mean, AI is great, but like if you don't take a practical approach at learning AI right now, there's still a lot of career opportunities for you. Like this is a great thing that's burgeoning, but like if you're just trying to, you've been working for one company, you're going to move to another company or whatever, how do you, I guess, assess and make choices in terms of how do we study up? What should we be learning? What types of skills are marketable and valuable? How do we know that? And I guess what can we do to hedge our bets? I mean, I imagine most of it is educational guesses. We're just kind of, we're hoping, or maybe if we've always been in automotive, then we're going to look at automotive technologies and how do we level up in technology or automotive. But, I wonder if you have sort of any, I don't know, sort of just points that you might make that would help job seeker, in their 30s to 50s who are now competing with 20 to 30-year-olds who've got a totally different outlook.
Yeah, definitely had advice. I'd say half my book is kind of walking people through this, right? Like I'm all for like the powerful statements of you just got to do it, but I'm also a practical person who's like, look, we weren't raised to change careers. That's why no one teaches you. When you go back to people that go get an MBA, they are taught how to change your career because over 70% of MBAs are career changers. So that's what that program was designed for. And I was blown away when I went and worked for one. I was like, whoa, they teach you these things? Like nobody taught me these things. Like I had to figure them out myself. So I would say to anyone that's thinking about this, like you're not alone. There's a lot of shame around talking about changing jobs, changing your career. And I read a stat that said something like 60% of people, I think it was a job bite, job bite survey. I'm not sure. 60% of people don't tell people when they're looking for another job.
Oh
And I
yeah.
thought, well,
Yeah, I've heard a study
wow.
that's sort of similar to that. I think it said like something like 67 or 57% of people don't like the job they're in, and as
Yeah.
many as half or more of that group are actively working against the company they're in.
Yeah.
So they're
Well,
you know, whether it's time
Yeah,
theft or
that's-
whatever else, they're
oof.
actively making choices
Yeah.
to sabotage the business they're working in, let alone just
So
not
we're going to
liking it.
assume that the people we're giving advice to are not sabotaging
Yeah,
companies, and I'll
fingers
just target the
crossed.
ones that are like, right, that are super, that are unhappy. And I start with that because, we tend to think, we're really isolated, right? And we're seeing all these images of people that got their shit together and have it together.
You're
And then
fine.
they're like, okay. And then, we're messages of just hustle, 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 be a boss, hustle. And it can feel very overwhelming. And so I would say, like, first start by claiming your space. Like, actually, like, say it out loud. Okay, I need to make a change here. Like, we're doing this. Like, commit to it, because you can spend all day on the job boards searching for jobs and talking yourself out of it. But until you like actually like make the like commitment to yourself that like, I'm going to do this, you're not going to get anywhere, right? You have to actually own up to it. That's the first part. The second part is like starting with your general curiosity, because a lot of us were raised with the idea of just follow your passion, which sounds amazing, looks great as an Insta post, but quite honestly, it can be paralyzing. Because if you have found your passion before and burnt out, or found your passion and it didn't work out, in my case, that had happened, or if you just don't know what your passion is, or your passion doesn't make money, a lot of people feel stuck. And so sometimes it's just hard to figure out what your path is if you don't know your passion. And so I'd say embrace your curiosity, because it's about trying to figure out, like, you don't have to have the plan when you start. You have to just look at options. And it starts with curiosity. There's an exercise in my book that I talk about spending a week writing down everything that makes you curious. It seems like such a simple task, but really it's getting you in the process of thinking through what's out there. Because a lot of us spend our time, like, if we're in a job we hate, we spend a lot of time thinking about the job we hate, why we hate our job, how we do everything differently if we were in charge and they should pay us more money, right? Like, and then we, the act of searching for jobs online is so depressing, right? Because you, like, if you're trying to make a change and you don't have the skills, you're like, all you see is kind of the negative. You're like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And so you've got to get yourself out of that completely. And my other advice to someone who's just starting to, again, you don't need a plan, you need a path, right? So you're not looking for the be all solve all right now. I'm talking about when you're just starting and you don't know what to do. Talk to people. Talk to people about their backgrounds. It is one of the most powerful tools you can use in this entire process.
One thing that I've heard that going back to Jordan Harbinger, he was talking about it on like a Feedback Friday show where people can email him and ask him questions, and one guy was talking about like the hiring process and say, for example, you want to be an executive working in this industry, healthcare, for example, or something like that, and you're a low man on the totem pole. If you go and ask the guy who has the job that you want, what should someone like me who's just entering this field focus on and do to end up in a position like you in 10 years? And he said, you don't want to say, take your job or get your job, because it throws up red flags for the guy, because he doesn't want to necessarily give advice to someone who's going to potentially take his job. But if you go into it and say, hey, I'm looking for advice to get to a position like you in 10 years, he feels a little bit less threatened, and then he might actually give you legit advice on how to do that and how to get there and what you should do. I think the question that he was referring to was, should I get an MBA? Should I go and spend the $50,000 to get it? Is the return worth it? And then in some positions, it might be, but in others, nah, you might make a $5 increase and spend the next 40 years with your $5 increase paying off the debt that you just took on to get it.
I mean, that's absolutely part of it. And I think that goes back to your point. Like, you're asking about information about, advice and stuff like that. I think, that's definitely one way to do it. When I talk about talking to people, you can bring it down to another level too, and just start learning about what people do. A lot of people are like, well, what do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm a financial analyst. Well, great. Or in my case, I actually am a conversation designer for a chatbot, and people have no idea what that is, and that's okay, because it's not a non-common job. It's a new type of role, and people are like, oh, okay. and then they move on. Well, we don't know what is that, right? And so being able to ask follow-up questions and say, well, could you tell me a little bit about what that's like? And then the most powerful question, how did you get into that? That's one of the two-part question there. That asking how you got into something elicits so many interesting stories. That's the basis of my podcast. It's called 50 Conversations. And all I do is ask people how they got into their path that they're in, right? Because it's wild. One, you'll see yourself in some of those stories. Not all of them, because let's be real, people are messy and people are boring. Like, you're gonna have conversations where you're like, well, I don't know why I just talked to you, right? Right. You have these conversations that are so interesting. You're like, holy crap! If I had not have talked to them, I would have never learned that. And so, I think we've been beaten up the head with this idea of networking. The idea that we're going to be like, giving out business cards and selling ourselves, and that's total garbage. Right? Like, we're talking about how do you make connections with people? How do you have conversations and learn from people? And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about going out to talk to people. You can do it with your coworkers. You can do it with family, friends. You can talk to your friends, like, be like, real, how did you get into this? Right? And then tell people, like, at the end of it, if it was a good conversation, say, yeah, I'm thinking about making a change. I haven't figured it out, but I'm looking at options. Because what that does is you give yourself space to have that ambiguity. Americans, we like packages. We like final decisions, right? Be a decision maker. And a career change is the opposite of that. It's a lot of ambiguity, especially in the beginning if you don't know what you're going to do. And so getting comfortable with that and being able to claim that and say, you know what? I'm thinking about looking for a change, or thinking about making a change. Don't know what I'm going to do yet, but this conversation helped, right? Like that right there. And you get more comfortable doing that, and you get more comfortable. Now, don't do that to your boss if, like, you're in a terrible situation, but right? People know the context. Sure. And, it's an exercise in my book. It's called 50 Conversations, and it's for people who are just starting out. Now,
it's interesting. I mean, that whole idea, I mean, basically, so a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I had just come off a consulting relationship with an agency. And my wife was fed up of me starting and getting laid off by agencies over and over again, because this is the agency business, right? We go to work and then they lay us off. And so my wife was tired of that and basically said, hey, look, you got to make a decision. Either go work in-house someplace where you have some stability, you be a designer somewhere, or you've got to make your business work. Like, this needs to just be life, and we need to stop with this going back and forth working for agency thing. And so I put some thought to that. And what I started doing was, I think, kind of what you're describing. I went out and I started reaching out via LinkedIn to, like, every CEO, C whatever O I could get a hold of, CMO, CXO, C whatever O. And basically no premise, no sales pitch, no anything. But my background is in art direction, creative direction, things like that. And so I was going to these people and just saying, hey, you know what? I've got to run a business now. And I wondered if you'd be willing to just kind of give me some advice, and talk to me. So we sat down, we talked, we had, half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just to kind of sit and rap about that. No pressure. I wasn't trying to get business out of them, nothing like that. And I met a number of, like, really high-level, high-powered executives, like, here in sort of the Salt Lake Valley that, I mean, they just make this part of their deal. Like, they just one day a week take lunches with people like me that just want to ask questions. And it's a really cool thing. But what I found is that, first of all, people are really generous, and they're willing to share that kind of stuff. They're not, there's no secrets. And in fact, most of them, the advice I ended up getting from them was largely nothing I could actually act on. It was just hearing from many people that there is no map, that there is no just path. You have to just go and do your thing, do what you think is best, and then pivot and do the next thing you think's best, and then pivot. And then, and that's just life. That's what these guys are doing. So, I mean, so as a, young entrepreneur, not that young anymore, but as an entrepreneur looking at these guys, I look at them and I go, oh my God, how could I ever be as good as they are? Hey, how do I ever get to that level? Blah, blah, blah. And then you go sit down with them and they go, oh, well, I have no idea. We're just figuring it out, we're just doing the same thing you're doing. And so, but to your point about, going out and speaking with people, whether it's, specifically career focused or just getting out and building relationships and developing conversations, you just never know what you'll learn from whom. And I think if you sort of approach everybody you talk to in this way, where you're curious, you actually give a damn about what they have to say, you do that active listening, and you do actually make an effort to pay attention to what they're telling you. You'd be surprised how many little golden nuggets you can pull out of these conversations that will, A, help you in your life, B, make them feel like you've got a good relationship going, and C, you'll be the one they think of when they're ready for something, or when something else comes up, you're the one they call. The perfect example is we just won a client for our agency this week. Actually, I'm waiting on the contract, so I'm trying not to be too fired up about it yet. But Lord willing, assuming it happens, this whole ability to talk with the CEO of this company was because I met one of his buddies in the lobby of a co-working space, and I talked to him for about 7 to 10 minutes a year ago.
Oh, yes.
And in that period of time, he somehow remembered my name. He somehow remembered all these things. And then a year later, when this guy was looking for someone to do this work, ours was the name he gave. And so, I had no way of knowing, but I went into that conversation fully authentic, fully friendly. I actually cared what he was talking about. It wasn't a sales pitch, and here we were a year later able to take some work from him or, win some business off that relationship. Even though it was a small little relationship, it was small but impactful.
Yeah. And as a coach, you hear these, I'm not doing coaching, I'm doing training more, but when I was a coach, I would hear stories like this all the time, right? And again, we're taught that it's networking, but really what we're talking about is conversation. So whenever I do workshops on networking, I talk about conversation. How do you have conversations? How do you engage? Because the more we engage in digital spaces, the more we lose our ability to talk to one another. Mm-hmm. And the thing that, that's striking about what you were saying is, having all these conversations, not only are you learning, because you should always approach this through the perspective, I'm going to learn something. I'm not here to get a job. I'm not here to get the answers, but I'm here to learn. And when you approach it like that, that shifts the dynamic of the conversation. It makes it much more approachable. But the second part that I love about it, you're building a skill set. If you're able to go out and talk to people that you don't know, engage them, make an impression, build a relationship, that's sales right there. That's business development. That's I work in user experience, so getting to understand different people and their habits and their needs, all of this, you're building a skill for future jobs. And communication skills, top skill you can have in the workplace. For sure. Especially oral communication. It's one of those skills everyone thinks they can have because they're like, oh, I can talk. Yeah. Right? As we can see.
Yeah, the trick is listening, though.
Yes, so much of the conversation is that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask about skills. Do we have time for that, or do you want to?
If you've got time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could go a little bit further. I'll tell you about the skills part because that's where I think a lot of people get tripped up. Again, going back to kind of the narrative is, we're taught, well, if we got to make a change, we just go back to school, right? But with tuition, it's just insane, especially if you've already, have a 4-year degree and you're still paying off student loans. That idea of going back to school can feel very overwhelming.
Well, and so there was a period of time, actually the start of this podcast, where I was focusing heavily on web development and programming and learning that. But I had just gotten out of school for audio engineering, and I had still student debt for that. And, I was thinking I was going to go and become a web developer, and that would be my day job. And just being able to jump on, learning platforms like Pluralsight and Treehouse and a few other ones and teach myself, I was able to kind of get the basic understanding of I didn't want to do this for the rest of my life and get that out of the way without the $40,000 education bill, and then realizing I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would.
Yeah. And that right now is the beauty of where we're at right now. Because with all this change, we now have access to far more learning experiences than we had in previous generations. So your example right there, the learning platforms, the self-directed learning too. So you can still go on I've been using Khan Academy right now to learn SQL. You've got Free Code Camp. You've got learning communities.
Well, MIT posts their whole curriculum online for the most part. So you could go and get the same degree that someone had going through MIT, paid $100,000 to get. You might not get the paper, but you can get the education.
Right.
It's like, what's that Coursera movie with...
I use Coursera, and that's, they've got, actual degree programs, or maybe they're not degree programs, but little programs run by main universities, big universities. And so you can just go to University of Illinois and take whatever, just do it through here, it's very
wild.
Cool.
Yeah, and so those are
future of
affordable.
all that is crazy.
Yeah, so you have that, you have boot camps. So I've been interviewing people on the podcast that went through boot camps, they went through certificate programs. I had someone on that just did community college, because a lot of community colleges, we tend, tend to think of those as like pathways to 4-year, but in fact, they're partnering with local employers to do cutting edge programs. So you have like cybersecurity, like that is one of the top paying fields right now for people that want to make money. My goodness, you've got apprenticeships, you've got workplace programs. Most people don't think of HR, right, until after they've, they sign their contract and they move on. But like a lot of places of work have something to offer, right? You could have a conversation with your boss if you have a good relationship about, is there a budget for learning? A lot of companies that do remote work have remote employers. There are a lot of like new startups and stuff like that. They have learning budgets.
Well, and another thing too is if you go in and you're entry-level job and you go to an employer like Adobe or something like that, and you ask them if they have further education programs, and if they do, and you're able to apply them and go and get your MBA or get whatever it is and have them pay for it, A, they're excited about it because it shows incentive, like motivation on the employer's side, and B, if you're the employee that's getting the benefits, say for example, layoffs come up, right? And they're 15 grand invested in your education, you're going to be lower on the totem pole of getting the axe because they've invested 15 grand into you learning and hoping that you're going to be around in 4 or 5 years so that the education that they just paid for benefit them. Yeah. So it's almost like job security too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too. Yeah, and I think, most people are, if you're unhappy in your career, we tend to turn away from our employers. But honestly, go investigate what the options are. They may just have like free LinkedIn learning, right? Maybe they're putting together a conference that you didn't know about and you could go to it. I mean,
well, even companies like Starbucks. I mean,
you can get a degree at the University of Arizona through Starbucks.
Exactly.
Or now Arizona State.
So you can go.
That's a way to do it too.
Yeah, pretty cool. All right, well, hey, I think we're getting a little long in the tooth, and we need to wrap this baby up. Let you resume your afternoon. Before we let you go, though, where can people find out more about your book, your podcast, and learn more about you and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So for the podcast, it's just 50 conversations, and it's the number 50, conversations.com. And then for my website and the book, I'm currently at futureskills.blog.
Nice.
So those things will change in the future once the book's out in November. But they can go check it out, get on the list. We're doing a free virtual launch where it's like free career coaching. My goodness, that never happens.
Oh, wow.
So people can get on there and get invited to that. And it should be a good time.
That's awesome. Well, and do shoot us a note when the book drops and everything, and we'll make sure to talk about it on this end too. So
thanks.
So cool. Well, thanks so much, Nicolle. We really appreciate your time and are grateful you were able to make time to visit with us today.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Great
so with that, we'll call it a wrap. So thanks to everybody who tuned in on the live stream and everything else. Everybody who downloads the show every week, continue to follow us, eggscast.com. Feel free to shoot us notes or thoughts or anything else that you'd like to talk about. Questions.
The interaction's what we're looking for. We'd like to hear from you.
Yep.
So rate, like, subscribe, do all the fun stuff you don't want to do, but we would appreciate it if you would.
Cool. And Nicolle, once again, thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks.